Science,
engineering,
medicine,
chemistry,
physics,
biology, humanities, cardiology,
computing, public health, global health,
aeronautics,
Science communication.
Yes, hello again everyone, I'm Gareth Mitchell. Today, an insider view from Imperial on the IPCC's report on climate change. Also today, on your bike, well, on your trike, as engagement hits the road on three wheels.
It's lovely to bring it out on the street because people don't go into places to watch things, do they? They'll just walk past. But here, there's quite a nice gathering. And they're wanting to see, they're wanting to test. Like my husband, he wants to watch the magnets, and I want to watch the roses. So it's a brilliant idea.
And we're at the Freshers' Fair, trying out a new sport.
The Imperial College Podcast.
So, welcome, and as ever, let's have some news. Sam Wong is here, and a story that you've been looking into, Sam, about ballerinas, why they don't get dizzy.
Yeah, so I don't know, you may have wondered, or maybe you haven't wondered, I don't know.
No, all the time.
You may have seen ballerinas performing these pirouettes where they spin around very quickly. You look at that
You
and you think,
why don't they get dizzy?
Exactly. Dr. Barry Seemangal from the Department of Medicine was interested in this question because he sees a lot of patients who have chronic dizziness, so people particularly associated with migraines, people who just feel dizzy or off balance or like they're spinning or...
So non-ballerinas?
Non-ballerinas who have these problems, and they try and kind of rehabilitate them and train them, and they have some success with treating people in this way. But to improve their treatment, he was interested in understanding what happens in ballerinas' brains and what enables them to avoid dizziness when they do pirouettes.
How on earth do you research something like that?
Well, you get a spinny chair.
No.
Spinny chair, and you have a handle on the chair, and you spin people around in the chair, and the volunteer turns the handle to kind of indicate how much they feel like the room is spinning. So that tells you their perception of dizziness. And also, at the same time, they measure these reflexes. They measure your eye movements. So if you imagine spinning around in a chair and you stop spinning, and then your eyes continue to flip back and forth as if you're spinning around. That's a reflex initiated by the vestibular organs in the inner ear, those semicircular canals which are filled with fluid. So the reason why you feel dizzy is that when you stop spinning, the fluid in the chambers continues to move, and that's what creates the sensation of dizziness.
So through these rather hideous sounding, but obviously very important and very well designed experiments, you get a sense of the perception and people's idea of whether they're dizzy or not. But how much did that help to explain the mechanism by which people get dizzy? Because that's presumably what was the most important thing that the team wanted to find out.
Yeah, so they compared those measurements with brain scans. So they had a group of ballet dancers and a group of rowers who were matched for age, and they were all women as well. They compared the two groups. So they looked at the ballet dancers. They had a shorter experience of dizziness. They felt dizzy for less long after you spin them in a chair. They looked for differences in brain structure between ballet dancers and rowers.
So the experiments happened, conclusions were drawn. What conclusions were drawn?
Well, when they looked at the brain scan, they found two areas of the brain that were different. In fact, two areas that were slightly smaller in the ballet dancers compared with the rowers. So one of them is in the cerebellum at the back of the brain, and it's an area that processes the input from the vestibular organs in the inner ear. And they think that area is smaller because ballet dancers are actually not using their vestibular system that much. It's not useful for them to have that input that tells them that they're dizzy, or that they rely instead on pre-programmed movements. So they know exactly where they're going to be, and they don't need their kind of balance organs to tell them what's going on. So that area is a bit smaller, and also an area at the front of the brain in the frontal cortex seem to be a bit smaller, and they think that that's related to the perception of dizziness. So they think that the brain is suppressing the input from the vestibular organs, and you have less of this signal from those organs going to the front of the brain, and that's why you feel less dizzy.
Fascinating. And so ultimately this could lead to some kind of treatment, or certainly a better understanding of these really hideous sounding conditions where people do just have chronic dizziness.
Exactly. So they hope that if they can target the same brain areas or monitor them in patients with chronic dizziness, they might begin to understand how to treat them better.
All right, Sam, thank you very much indeed for that. Now, also here is Rosemary Peters. And Rosemary, you've been looking at some Imperial College research that's been assessing the relationship between EU membership and a conservation issue, haven't you?
Yeah, so Croatia has entered the EU as of the 1st of July, and it's actually caused some pretty interesting outcomes for its bear population. Not something you would normally think would happen, but pretty much the EU has a blanket conservation policy that brown bears are considered protected animals. So that means that they can't be hunted. The only reason that somebody would have to kill a bear is if the bear is causing some sort of conflict, so like raiding a farm or something of the like. Croatia has actually been managing its brown bear population by selling the rights to hunt a certain portion of the bear population. I think it's about 10 to 15%. So people are less inclined to kill bears that are problem animals.
Okay, because if a bear does cause a problem, then the person who's affected or whose land is affected, they get some kind of compensation, I guess, from the actual bear hunters.
Yes. So the hunting organizations that are selling the rights to hunt the bears have used the money that they are taking in from this small economic process to compensate the farmers. And so they can quickly just pay off the farmers who have had the issues with the bears. It keeps people happy with the bears. It makes it so that they're not inclined to go out and poach them. But with joining the EU, this Imperial study points out that there might be issues that will arise between the people and the bears in Croatia, because instead of relying on each other in the symbiotic relationship, the Croatians are then going to have to follow the EU policy of using the protected animal status, so they can no longer hunt the bears.
And do they have another European state to compare to?
So the reason for these worries comes out of looking at a similar thing that happened in Slovenia with the brown bear population. So in Slovenia, they joined the EU maybe about 5-10 years ago, and they had good relations with the brown bear population previous to joining the EU. But after joining the EU, those relations started to become tense, and they saw the bears more as a nuisance, and the compensation for if a bear raided a farm or attacked a village was then apportioned from the EU, not from local hunting organizations. So it took much longer, and in general, I think they were actually just not getting the compensation to the same amount that they were previously. People in Slovenia then became less inclined to handle the bears in a manner that wouldn't involve killing them. This has actually led to the brown bear population in Slovenia being culled at a rate of almost 20%, which is significantly higher than it was before it had entered the EU.
Do we know what the outcome of all this is going to be? Or is this really just a study and we'll just see what happens?
It's just a study at the moment. The outcome from the researchers' point of view is that the one-size-fits-all EU conservation policy for brown bears is something that should be reconsidered, because there isn't a one-size-fits-all policy that's going to work for everyone. It should be country by country, and it needs to have the consent of the local people in order to be successful.
And who has done the study here at Imperial?
So that's Professor E.J. Milner-Goland, and she's in the Life Sciences Department here at Imperial. And she did the research with MSc student Emma Knott.
Splendid. Rosemary, thank you. Well, now, last week saw the IPCC's climate change report. There was swift reaction from within and outside the scientific community, and for its part, Imperial posted on its news website perspectives from some of our leading researchers. One of them was Simon Buckle, Policy Director for the Grantham Institute for Climate Change. Well, I've been speaking to Simon, and I wondered what for him was the most eye-catching element of that report.
The report, in its headlines, didn't say anything radically new, unless you count the fact that there's increased confidence about the fact that we have a human fingerprint on the climate change that's happening, and that was pretty definitive. Some of the striking details, I think, are in things like the really large acceleration in ice loss from the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets. You're seeing an acceleration there compared to, say, the previous decade of something like a factor of 4 or 5, maybe even 6 in Greenland. And these are really quite striking. They're not yet contributing to sea level rise as much as the glacier melt and the thermal expansion of the ocean due to the extra energy coming into the climate system from the greenhouse gases that humans are putting into the system. But still, that's a very dramatic symptom of the change that we're causing.
And yet, of course, people point out equally there is the so-called climate pause, no overall increase in climate system temperatures for the last 15 years. Is that outweighed then by the evidence that you've just been talking about, the Arctic ice sheets, the oceans, and so on?
So the thing to remember about averages of climate variables is that they need to be taken over a pretty long period. Now, you might debate exactly what that is, but at least it has to be a few decades, and 15 years is really too short a period to make very strong statements about temperature trends and longer-term things like climate change. It's just not statistically meaningful. So what I'd say is that, yes, there is obviously a slowdown in the rate of increase over this period. In 1997-98, we had an extremely strong El Nino, and that meant that the 1998 temperature was quite high relative to temperatures before that. After that, we did have some higher temperatures, but it doesn't mean that climate change has stopped. And as you suggested in your question, we do still see the indicators of incoming energy to the system, something like the equivalent of 200,000 1 gigawatt power stations pouring in energy to the climate system. It's an enormous effect that we're having on the system.
And finally, what can we say with any certainty about the effects of all this, say within the next 100 years? Sea level rises, more drought in some places, more extreme monsoons in others. How will the world look and feel within a century?
That's a difficult question because it depends a lot on what we decide to do about climate change and what we decide to do about our emissions, and therefore, whether we decide to do things like make a transition to a low carbon economy or whether we carry on with a very fossil fuel intensive growth path. And the latter will obviously give us bigger changes than if we make a transition to a low carbon economy. Now, the IPCC ran 4 main scenarios that sort of spanned that range. And the low one, may well keep you below 2 degrees, but it demands action on a scale that, is hugely ambitious. And, we have to really begin to act quickly if you're to keep that scenario as a realistic option. The more fossil fuel intensive scenario means that by the end of the century, it's as likely as not that we'll have a global mean surface temperature change of more than 4 degrees centigrade relative to the late part of the 19th century. Now, that's 4 degrees on average. So in parts of the globe, you're going to be seeing changes easily of 7, 8, maybe 9 degrees centigrade over the high latitudes. And this is going to be a tremendous change to those areas. So think of the permafrost in the high Arctic, these sorts of areas. And temperature, of course, is not the only thing you need to worry about. As you say, you need to worry about the increased intensity of precipitation that we expect from this, increased risks of floods, sea level will rise, bringing about greater exposure of coastal cities to things like storm surges and flooding. And we've seen plenty of that just in the US in recent years.
Simon Buckle speaking to me there in the Grantham Institute. Well, now, it has 3 wheels, and at first sight it looks as if it delivers ice cream. But a closer look reveals that this particular tricycle is dishing out science, accompanied by vendors who, instead of dispensing cones, dispense scoops of scientific knowledge. Yes, this is Imperial's public engagement tricycle, and it's been wheeled into events such as the Imperial Fringe and the Imperial Festival. It's won a prestigious award as well as a creative platform for researchers to demonstrate their work. And as Mike Jones has been finding out, the trike is just one of many vehicles, yes, sorry I couldn't resist that one, for Imperial scientists to peddle their discoveries, there we go again, engaging with and sometimes bemusing residents and visitors to South Kensington and beyond.
In heating the water up in the strawberry, you're cooling down your mouth. So there, that results in cold burn. But with this, the 200-degree change in temperature is just like a 2-degree change in your mouth.
Postgraduate Mark Curry there talking about the wonders of frozen marshmallows. In the last week of September, he wasn't the only one preaching about what they practice. It was the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea's celebration of science, where people from around the borough found innovative ways to get their message across. Imperial's offering was Research in Motion, a series of lunch dates on the streets of South Kensington with a selection of tasty treats and tantalising science delivered from Imperial's award-winning public engagement tricycle.
There were some guys, interesting guys, with white coats on, looking quite chic geek. Some plumes of smoke and dry ice looking stuff, fire-related smoke looking stuff. Very exciting.
Got a big batch, right?
Yeah, it's quite a big batch of ice cream coming in. So the liquid nitrogen is at minus 200 degrees centigrade, and because it's so cold, it causes the ice cream to freeze very quickly.
Well, he's making, is it ice cream or something very creamy which looks very tasty?
Yeah, he's making ice cream.
I'm not really sure if I would try, but it would make life so much easier. He's making ice cream in what, 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
Yeah. I'm a dietitian and I'd never had an ice cream made like this before. It tastes very good. The texture is interesting as well. Perfect. It melts normally.
I've been to the V&A to see the Pearl exhibition. and I've never seen anything like this.
It's lovely to bring it out on the street because people don't go into places to watch things, do they? They'll just walk past. But here there's quite a nice gathering, and they're wanting to see, they're wanting to test, they want to try the marshmallows. And like my husband, he wants to watch the magnets, and I want to watch the roses, so it's a brilliant idea.
As well as experiments with liquid nitrogen, researchers from the college could be found making elephants' toothpaste, showing how rust forms, and even demonstrating the possible future of space travel.
My name is Jessel Majavadia, more commonly known as Jazz.
During Research in Motion, Jazz, you took to the streets with the Imperial trike. What did you do, and how do you think it went?
So my role last week was to do a soapbox science act. And in my case, what I talked about was my PhD. So I was talking about a phenomenon called delayed hydride cracking, which can happen in oil pipelines and also inside nuclear reactors. And I used a few apples, I used some marbles, which I lost really quickly. I used a trampoline to demonstrate elastic interactions.
And how do you think it went, trying to capture people on Exhibition Road for 5 minutes of their time while you explained some potentially quite in-depth science?
It was, I'll say this, it was definitely challenging. But you do catch the odd person who is just wandering by and is interested. And changing the way that I approached different people and changing what I said to different people to get them a bit interested is the most difficult thing to do. And you get the hang of it by just practicing. But it's also, as you say, I think it's the most valuable thing that I've learned because it enables me to gauge my audience very quickly and tailor what I say to them. If we had an event where there was just, like 10, 15, 20 soapbox science people like lining Exhibition Road, I think that would make for an amazing event.
As Jazz alluded to there, having many different people on soapboxes talking about their science is a great way to engage people in one particular place. And that's exactly what happened when thousands of visitors went to the Natural History Museum for Science Uncovered 2013. The event forms part of EU Researchers' Night, where hundreds of people across the country and thousands across the continent get together to talk about science and research. Are you enjoying Science Uncovered, sir?
Oh, very much so. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. What have you found out about today?
Well, at the moment, I'm just looking at the brain injury, and I think it's fantastic. The general idea of chemistry being used for treating brain injury is something that wouldn't have naturally occurred to me, but obviously, when you think about it, it's quite obvious. So, yeah, to be honest, it's actually just fantastic to see certain aspects of science that maybe haven't been covered so much in the media.
Imperial was represented at the event by researchers talking about chlorophyll, energy and food webs, and studies about the heart.
That report from Mike Jones. Well, last week, music boomed out from large loudspeakers, a glider appeared on the Queen's lawn, and the finest and the best from the union set out their collective stall. Yes, it was the Freshers' Fair. Tamara Such was at the fair herself, where amid the hockey, football, running and rugby, she discovered a new sport.
Okay, so I'm standing at the Kabaddi stand and I'm talking to...
My name is Prajesh. I'm one of the members of the committee.
Okay, so could you tell me a little bit about the club itself? I've never heard of Kabaddi. What is it?
Okay, basically, the best way to describe it probably is a mixture between, say, tag and dodgeball and wrestling. The objective of the game is that the 2 teams of 7, one team sends what you call a raider to the opposition's half, and their job is to touch as many of the people on the opposition's half as possible and make it back into your own half. And obviously the opposition's job is to try and stop that person touching anybody and keeping them in their own half.
So did you say it's a really new club?
Yeah, we only established last year. I think there was only like 10 of us playing the sport, but we had a lot of fun. You see, we went to a tournament and we didn't finish last, which was an achievement for us. So this year we're trying to expand, trying to get more freshers involved, and it's brilliant sport to play.
Okay, so how many members have you got so far for this year?
Well, at the moment there's around about 10, but judging by our mailing list and everything, we're hoping to maybe get another 30 to 40 more people.
That sounds really good. So what do you think is the biggest draw of the club?
I mean, we're unlike other sports clubs. We're really small, so we have a lot of banter between each other, and Like last year, we had a couple of videos on YouTube that went viral in a couple of societies. So if you want, more of a reason to join, just type Imperial Kabaddi in YouTube, and if that doesn't convince you, nothing really will.
What is it that you personally get out of running the club?
I think for me, it's like I've met some really great people, and like I regard them as like my brothers and my sisters now. So like it's a sense of sort of companionship and family, and I think that's what like coming to uni is about: meeting people, networking, but at the same time like making relationships that last a long time. And I'm sure like all the people I meet through the society, I'll remember for a long time as well.
Fantastic! Thank you very much for your time.
Reporting from the Freshers' Fair, that was Tamara Such, which is pretty much it for this edition. But do remember, of course, there is plenty of audio and video from around the college on our very lovely YouTube channel. That's at youtube.com/Imperial College Video. On Twitter, we are at Imperial Spark. And alongside that, if you want to keep well and truly up to date with news and events from around the college, then do check out our news website. It is, believe it or not, at imperial.ac.uk/news. Well, I'm Gareth Mitchell. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.